Eisenhower was the calmest man in the room when the world needed calm the most. In photographs from World War II, he stands relaxed, smiling slightly, his uniform neat, his posture confident. To the public, to politicians, and to millions of soldiers who fought under his command, Eisenhower appeared unshakable. He was the steady hand guiding the largest military operation in human history. Yet beneath that calm exterior lived doubts so heavy that, had they been visible, they might have shaken Allied confidence to its core. Eisenhower was not born a conqueror or a natural showman. Unlike generals who thrived on battlefield theatrics or personal glory, Eisenhower was a manager of men, egos, and impossible expectations. His true battlefield was not always the front line, but the conference room, where British caution clashed with American aggression, where political pressure collided with military reality, and where every decision carried consequences measured in thousands of lives. Eisenhower's calm was not the absence of fear. It was the discipline of containing it. Long before the Allied invasion of Normandy, Eisenhower understood something few leaders openly admitted. The war could still be lost. By 1944, optimism filled newspapers and radio broadcasts. The Allies were advancing in Italy. The Soviet Union was pushing back the Germans in the East. American industrial power was unmatched. Yet Eisenhower knew that victory was not guaranteed. He feared that one catastrophic failure, one miscalculation, could undo years of sacrifice. Those fears followed him relentlessly as preparations for D-Day intensified. Operation Overlord was not simply a military plan. It was a gamble on an unprecedented scale. Never before had an invasion of this size been attempted across such a heavily fortified coastline. Eisenhower feared not just German resistance, but weather, logistics, human error, and the fragile unity of the Allied command itself. He feared that even if the plan was sound, reality would refuse to cooperate. Eisenhower's leadership required him to appear certain even when certainty did not exist. He had to reassure nervous commanders, inspire exhausted troops, and project confidence to political leaders who demanded results. But in private, Eisenhower wrestled with doubts that bordered on unbearable. He questioned whether the landings would overwhelm German defenses quickly enough. He worried about the narrow beaches, the exposed troops, the possibility of chaos in the first hours. He feared that airborne units would be scattered, that reinforcements would be delayed, that momentum would be lost before it could be established. What made Eisenhower's doubts particularly dangerous was not their presence, but their necessity. He could not share them openly. To do so would risk hesitation at every level of command. Eisenhower understood that leadership sometimes meant absorbing fear so others would not have to. His calm demeanor became a shield, one that protected morale, even as it concealed the weight he carried alone. The pressure intensified as June 1944 approached. Weather reports were inconsistent. Storms battered the English Channel. Every delay increased the risk of detection and weakened surprise. Eisenhower feared postponement might sap morale or give the Germans time to reinforce Normandy. Yet launching the invasion under poor conditions could doom it entirely. The decision rested on his shoulders alone. No committee, no shared blame. If Overlord failed, history would remember one name. In those final days, Eisenhower's doubts became more personal. He thought about the young men preparing to board landing craft, many of whom would not return. He feared the moral weight of ordering them into danger. Eisenhower was not a distant commander. He visited troops, spoke with them, looked into their faces. He knew their courage deserved honesty. Yet honesty could not include uncertainty. So he smiled, encouraged, and reassured, while privately questioning whether he was asking too much. One of the most revealing moments of Eisenhower's leadership came before a single soldier set foot on French soil. Anticipating failure, Eisenhower wrote a brief statement accepting full responsibility if the invasion went wrong. It was never intended for public eyes unless disaster struck. In it, he did not blame weather, intelligence, or subordinates. He blamed himself. This quiet act revealed the depth of his doubt and the seriousness with which he viewed his role. Eisenhower feared failure so deeply that he prepared for it in advance. Yet to those around him, Eisenhower remained composed. He listened more than he spoke. He mediated disputes between strong-willed generals. He He projected reassurance even when reports were grim. This contrast between outward calm and inner doubt became the defining feature of his leadership. Eisenhower feared that showing anxiety would fracture Allied unity, and unity was the invasion's lifeline. As D-Day dawned, Eisenhower's doubts did not disappear. They intensified. Reports from the beaches were chaotic and incomplete. Some landings succeeded. Others faltered. At Omaha Beach, casualties were staggering. Eisenhower feared that the invasion might stall before a foothold could be secured. He feared that German counterattacks would push the Allies back into the sea. And yet, he did not panic. He adjusted plans, authorized reinforcements, and trusted his commanders to adapt under fire. That trust was not blind. Eisenhower constantly questioned whether he had chosen the right people for the right roles. He doubted decisions made months earlier. He wondered if alternatives would have worked better. These doubts did not paralyze him. They sharpened his focus. Eisenhower's calm leadership was not the absence of conflict. It was the ability to function despite it. As the Allies slowly expanded their beachhead, Eisenhower's doubts evolved. He feared the breakout from Normandy would be slower than planned. He feared the Germans would regroup and prolong the war. He feared that Allied casualties would rise beyond what the public was prepared to accept. And looming over everything was the fear of political fallout. A prolonged stalemate could erode support, strain alliances, and shift priorities. Eisenhower's greatest challenge was not commanding armies, it was commanding uncertainty. Every success brought new risks. Every delay invited criticism. British leaders urged caution. American commanders pushed for speed. Eisenhower stood between them, absorbing pressure from all sides. His calm demeanor became his most powerful tool. It reassured allies and discouraged division, even as it concealed the doubts that never left him. The more successful the Allies became, the more dangerous Eisenhower's doubts grew. Success bred expectations. Expectations narrowed tolerance for failure. Eisenhower feared that one mistake, one misjudgment, could turn triumph into catastrophe. He knew that leadership at this level offered no room for complacency. Calm was not a luxury. It was a necessity. By the time Allied forces broke out of Normandy and surged across France, Eisenhower's doubts had not vanished. They had simply changed shape. He feared overextension. He feared supply shortages. He feared that bold advances might outrun logistics. He feared that the Germans, though retreating, were not finished. These fears would soon be tested in ways even Eisenhower could not fully anticipate. And yet, throughout it all, Eisenhower remained the same to those who saw him: calm, measured, unemotional. The man who never seemed rattled. Few realized that this calm was carefully constructed, not to deceive, but to protect. Eisenhower believed that leadership sometimes meant carrying the fear so others could move forward without it. As the war moved toward its final, brutal phase, Eisenhower's hidden doubts would resurface in new forms. They would challenge his confidence, strain his relationships with subordinates, and force decisions that history would scrutinize for generations. The calm face of Allied victory concealed a mind constantly wrestling with uncertainty, and the most dangerous doubts were still ahead. By late 1944, as Allied forces pushed deeper into Western Europe, Dwight D. Eisenhower found himself commanding not just armies, but expectations. The success of the Normandy landings and the rapid advance across France had created a dangerous illusion that the hardest part of the war in the West was over. To the public, Eisenhower appeared as steady as ever, the embodiment of calm authority guiding the Allies toward inevitable victory. But beneath that calm, his doubts had not faded. They had multiplied. Eisenhower understood that rapid success could be as perilous as failure. Supply lines stretched thin across devastated infrastructure. Fuel shortages slowed armored units. Ports were damaged or unusable. Eisenhower feared that the Allied advance had outrun its logistical foundation. He worried that commanders, intoxicated by momentum, would underestimate the enemy's capacity to recover. The German army was retreating, but it was not destroyed. And history had taught Eisenhower that a cornered enemy could still strike with terrifying force. These doubts intensified as winter approached. Eisenhower feared the coming weather would slow operations and strain already fragile supply systems. He feared that Allied troops, unprepared for prolonged cold and mud, would suffer physically and psychologically. But perhaps his greatest fear was complacency. Success had dulled the sense of urgency among some commanders. Eisenhower worried that confidence was replacing caution, and that the enemy would exploit it. The German counteroffensive, in December 1944, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, confirmed Eisenhower's worst fears. When reports arrived of German armor smashing through thinly held American lines in the Ardennes, Eisenhower felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The front was breaking where it was least expected. Units were surrounded. Communications were disrupted. Once again, the war had shifted from confident advance to desperate defense. To those around him, Eisenhower remained calm. He convened meetings, reassigned forces, and issued clear orders. But inside, his doubts sharpened into something far more dangerous: uncertainty about whether the Allied command structure could adapt quickly enough. He feared that national rivalries and personal egos would complicate the response. He feared that delayed decisions could turn a setback into disaster. The Battle of the Bulge forced Eisenhower into some of the most difficult decisions of his career. He had to temporarily place American forces under British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's command in the north. Strategically, it made sense. Politically and emotionally, it was explosive. Eisenhower feared backlash from American commanders who saw it as a slight. He feared damage to unity at the worst possible moment. But he believed that preserving the front mattered more than personal pride. Eisenhower's calm in these moments masked a deep anxiety about control. The battlefield was chaotic, the weather unforgiving, and information incomplete. Eisenhower feared making decisions based on flawed intelligence. He feared overreacting or underreacting. And unlike battlefield commanders who could see the fight unfold, Eisenhower had to rely on reports filtered through multiple layers of command. His doubts were fueled by distance. As the battle raged on, Eisenhower watched as individual commanders responded in dramatically different ways. Some hesitated, others pushed aggressively. Eisenhower feared imbalance. Too much caution in one sector, too much risk in another. Coordinating such diverse approaches required constant judgment. His calm demeanor became a stabilizing force, but it also isolated him. Eisenhower carried doubts he could not share, knowing that uncertainty at the top could cascade downward. The pressure of the Bulge exposed cracks not only in the front lines, but in relationships. Eisenhower's interactions with George Patton and Bernard Montgomery became increasingly strained. Patton's aggressive counterattack from the south impressed Eisenhower, but also reignited old fears about recklessness. Montgomery's methodical approach reassured him tactically, but raised concerns about speed and public perception. Eisenhower doubted whether either man fully understood the political and psychological dimensions of command he faced daily. Publicly, Eisenhower praised unity and cooperation. Privately, he worried that competing narratives of credit and blame would emerge. Before the battle was even over, he feared that success would breed rivalry rather than cohesion. And yet, he could not allow these concerns to paralyze him. Decisions had to be made quickly, even when the consequences were unclear. As Allied forces slowly contained and then reversed the German advance, Eisenhower's doubts shifted once again. He feared that victory in the Bulge might encourage overconfidence, similar to what had preceded it. He feared the Allies would fail to learn from the shock they had just endured. For Eisenhower, the Bulge was not just a battle, it was a warning, a reminder that the enemy remained dangerous, and that leadership could not afford complacency. The strain took a personal toll. Eisenhower aged visibly during the winter of 1944 to 45. His letters grew more reflective. Those close to him noticed moments of fatigue and quiet introspection. Yet his public demeanor never changed. He continued to project calm assurance, understanding that morale depended on his steadiness. Eisenhower feared that if he faltered, even briefly, it would ripple outward through the entire Allied command. As winter gave way to early spring, the Allies prepared for the final push into Germany. Eisenhower faced a new set of doubts. He feared the cost of urban combat. He feared stiffening German resistance as defeat loomed. He feared political complications as Allied armies approached areas soon to be influenced by post-war negotiations. Every military decision now carried diplomatic implications. Eisenhower also feared the moral weight of victory. He knew the destruction wrought by the Allied advance would be immense. Civilian suffering, displaced populations, and the revelations of Nazi atrocities weighed heavily on him. Eisenhower doubted whether history would judge the war solely by its outcome, or by the means used to achieve it. His calm leadership hid these ethical concerns, but they influenced his decisions nonetheless. The closer victory came, the more complex Eisenhower's doubts became. He feared not losing the war, but losing control of its ending. He feared that missteps in the final months could undermine the peace that would follow, and he feared that his role, so central during the war, would be reduced to simplified narratives that ignored the burdens he carried. Throughout it all, Eisenhower remained what the world needed him to be: calm, reliable, steady. He understood that leadership at this scale required emotional discipline bordering on self-denial. His doubts were dangerous not because they weakened him, but because acknowledging them openly could have weakened everyone else. As Allied forces prepared to cross the Rhine and deliver the final blows to Nazi Germany, Eisenhower stood at the threshold of victory, still burdened by uncertainty. The calm that had carried the Allies through the darkest moments now concealed doubts about the future, about peace, memory, and responsibility. And in the final chapter of the war, Eisenhower would confront the most profound doubts of all. As Allied forces crossed the Rhine and advanced into the heart of Germany in early 1945, Dwight D. Eisenhower stood at the edge of victory, carrying doubts heavier than any he had faced before. The war, which had once demanded bold gambles and decisive action, now required restraint, judgment, and moral clarity. Eisenhower's calm leadership, so effective in guiding the Allies through invasion and counteroffensive, now concealed fears that victory itself could become dangerous if mishandled. Eisenhower feared that the final phase of the war would tempt commanders into unnecessary risks. The enemy was collapsing, but desperation often made resistance more brutal, not less. Urban fighting loomed. Civilian populations were trapped between advancing armies and retreating defenders. Eisenhower doubted whether the cost of speed outweighed the value of caution. Every order now carried consequences that extended beyond the battlefield and into the moral record of history. The question of Berlin weighed heavily on Eisenhower's mind. Many expected the Western Allies to race the Soviets to the German capital. Patton favored speed. British leaders debated prestige. But Eisenhower doubted the wisdom of sacrificing tens of thousands of lives for symbolic victory. Intelligence reports suggested that Berlin lay firmly within the Soviet sphere of advance. Eisenhower feared that pushing toward it would not only be costly, but politically destabilizing. His calm decision to halt, short of Berlin, concealed the anxiety of knowing that history might misinterpret restraint as weakness. Eisenhower also feared what Allied soldiers would encounter as they advanced. Reports of concentration camps began to surface. When Eisenhower visited liberated camps, the reality surpassed even his worst expectations. He doubted whether words could ever convey what had been uncovered. He feared denial, forgetting, and distortion. In response, Eisenhower made a deliberate decision to document everything, to ensure that future generations could not look away. This was not the action of a man without doubt. It was the action of a leader deeply uncertain about humanity's capacity to remember uncomfortable truths. As Germany collapsed, Eisenhower's doubts shifted inward. He questioned whether his decisions had shortened the war or merely shaped its final form. He thought about the lives lost under his command, the orders given without full knowledge of their outcomes. His calm demeanor never revealed these reflections, but they followed him relentlessly. Eisenhower understood that supreme command did not end with surrender. It ended with accountability. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, the world celebrated. Photographs captured smiles, handshakes, and relief. Eisenhower appeared as composed as ever, but victory brought no emotional release for him. Instead, it brought silence, and in that silence, doubt returned in its most personal form. Had he done enough? Had he done too much? Had the calm he projected protected lives, or had it sometimes concealed urgency? Eisenhower feared how history would simplify the war. He knew that narratives preferred heroes without hesitation and leaders without doubt. But Eisenhower believed the truth was more complex. Calm leadership, he knew, was not the absence of fear, it was the management of it. His doubts had not weakened him. They had forced him to listen, to weigh alternatives, to avoid reckless certainty. In the years after the war, as Eisenhower transitioned from general to statesman, those same doubts continued to shape him. As president, he warned against unchecked power and blind confidence. He understood better than most how easily certainty could become dangerous. His calm speeches concealed lessons, learned under extreme pressure, lessons forged in moments. When doubt had been unavoidable, Eisenhower never sought to portray himself as flawless. In private reflections, he acknowledged mistakes and near failures. He understood that leadership demanded humility as much as authority. His doubts had made him cautious when others were eager, patient when others were impulsive, and restrained when others sought glory. These qualities did not always capture public imagination, but they preserved stability when it mattered most. The dangerous doubts Eisenhower carried were dangerous not because they threatened collapse, but because they forced him to confront uncomfortable realities. He doubted easy answers. He doubted absolute solutions. He doubted the idea that victory alone justified every cost. And in doubting, he governed himself. History often remembers Eisenhower as the calm architect of Allied victory. That image is true, but incomplete. Beneath that calm was a leader constantly questioning himself, aware that confidence without reflection could lead to catastrophe. His doubts did not paralyze him. They disciplined him. Eisenhower's legacy is not just one of success, but of balance. He demonstrated that leadership does not require the absence of fear, but the courage to carry it without letting it spread. His calm leadership hid dangerous doubts, because revealing them would have endangered unity, morale, and momentum. Yet those doubts quietly shaped decisions that saved lives and preserved the fragile alliance holding the war effort together. In the end, Eisenhower proved that calm can be a form of strength, and doubt a form of wisdom. The war demanded leaders who could act decisively without surrendering judgment. Eisenhower was that leader, not because he never questioned himself, but because he never allowed doubt to eclipse responsibility. And that is why Eisenhower's calm leadership mattered so deeply. It was not the calm of certainty. It was the calm of a man who understood how much was at stake and chose, every day, to bear that burden alone.